Welcome to the Directions Mag Geoinspirations podcast series with Joseph Kerski.
Well, greetings, folks. Welcome to another installment of Geoinspirations with Directions Magazine. Joseph Kerski here. So glad that you're joining us today. I'm very pleased to announce that I'm here with one of my all-time favorite colleagues, Erika Klose. And Erika, welcome to Geoinspirations.
Well, thank you, Joseph. I'm so excited to be here.
I think the listeners are really going to love hearing your journey, your story. And I think many people actually know you in the science, geography, geospatial education community. But just for the benefit of those, especially who aren't familiar with you, could you explain, first of all, what your position is now and a little bit about how you journeyed to that position?
Sure. It might be a little hard to say just a little bit about my journey, but I will do my very best. So I am now currently, I work for the West Virginia Department of Education. I am an assistant director in our Office of Middle and Secondary Learning, which is in our Division of Teaching and Learning. So we coordinate standards for instruction for all instructional areas. We have a number of coordinators within our office that each have different specialties. I, in my current position, among other things that I do, I coordinate computer science, I coordinate our statewide STEM initiatives, and then I coordinate all of our GIS. So it's an exciting place to be. It's a place where I'm working really hard to try and affect some, positive change and do really some things that are best for our students in the state. And it's exciting. It's a good place to be.
Well, one of the things I respect the most about you, Erika, is that you're always about the students. You've always been about effective teaching and learning, research, and more. And I hope to unpack a little bit of that with you today. But anyway, much kudos for your position there. I'm sure you're making a positive difference. And having known you for these years, I know you're making a positive difference. What about, you kind of touched on this. You have a really fascinating journey. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on here today. But if you could tell us a little bit about that journey, that would be wonderful.
Well, I would love to. So I think that when I think back on my journey, one of the things that's so exciting to me is that I can see where so often in life we have plans and then things happen in our lives and something better comes along than when we could ever have hoped for. When I went to college, I had a plan and I was going to study art and art history. And I had a whole, postgraduate plan related to that. And then I took this class in geology and specifically in natural disasters and absolutely fell in love with geology. I fell in love with the topic. I fell in love with our department. I fell in love with all the technology that we used. And it absolutely just completely changed my path. So I did an undergraduate degree in geology. I went straight into a master's program in geology and geophysics. And when I was in that program, I took my very first class in GIS, and that was a long, long time ago. So we're talking sort of like Arc Info days, but I saw the power in it, and used it a small amount. But what was interesting to me was right after that, when I started looking for a job, I actually got a internship with the U.S. Geological Survey in Woods Hole, Massachusetts, and I really believe that what pushed me over the over above other candidates when I was applying for that was the fact that I had a course in GIS, because what that position very quickly became was a straight GIS position. I mean, we were investigating a geologic issue. It was a project all about sea level rise, but the entire foundation of that project was GIS. So I worked in GIS and then in seafloor mapping for the USGS for about 7 years. And then while I was working there, having a wonderful time, I started doing all of the outreach for our office. And I started going into schools, specifically in the middle schools, and working with students and taking, doing different activities with them related to geology and mapping and remote sensing, things like that. And I would leave there at the end of the day and I would be so exhausted, but I would have such a sense of accomplishment. I would really say, be able to say, wow, I did something today. And I finally listened to that. And I think that was really my teacher heart that was kind of shouting, saying, you need to do this. So I did it. So I went back to school and did a master's in teaching, which was, one of the pathways that allowed me to get my teacher certification. And in that time period, moved from Massachusetts to West Virginia, which was another fabulous decision. And I really,
Continental drift, Erika. Continental drift.
Exactly. I love it here. And then I, went straight into the classroom. So I taught for 10 years at Winfield Middle School. I taught mostly 7th grade, which had lots of earth science in it, and had, just a wonderful time teaching. Within that time, actually, this is kind of neat, 10 years and 2 days ago, the state of West Virginia got their Esri educational license.
Oh my! I remember that day. There was a big announcement.
And it was a big announcement. I got an email about it as an educator and was so excited. I think that was in December, and I think I actually got my hands on the software the following summer. But about the time I got my hands on the software, it became clear that that the State Department of Ed really needed some support in kind of launching this initiative. So I ended up doing a lot of professional development for our State Department of Education in GIS while I was still teaching in the classroom. And so I had a wonderful opportunity to really get to know how the Department of Ed worked while staying in the classroom, and was able to really go out and work with a lot of educators and grow GIS within the state. And then a job came open here at the State Department of Ed, and I thought really long and hard about it, and I applied. So I've been here for about 1.5 years, and started out as a coordinator working solely with STEM and GIS, and now I'm in a director position, but I still get to do STEM and GIS and work with computer science. So I have a lot of opportunities to work with a lot of people. And something that I love is that I can show them how GIS really fits into all of what we do.
Which actually leads me to kind of a corollary question, Erika, and that is, knowing how passionate you are about geospatial, but you're curious and you have expertise in lots of different areas, how much of your current position are you able to focus, realizing that GIS touches on a lot of different core disciplines, earth science and mathematics, et cetera, but how much in your position are you able to sort of promote the use of geospatial technology in the state's education institutions?
The answer is not enough. I would love to be able to, to have that be my sole job. That would be great. But it's unfortunately, it's not the reality of what I can do, all the time. But at the same time, I'm in a position now where I'm able to show all of our content coordinators how they can use GIS. So if I did some training last summer with a math team, and did some professional development for teachers, and all of our math folks were sort of watching me deliver a PD on the math geo inquiries, and they just absolutely loved them. They were completely sold. So, one of the things that I'm working really hard on right now is making sure all of our content coordinators are sharing these resources with educators. So I don't get to do it enough, but I'm in a position now where I'm able to really work at replicating myself, because the reality was in the beginning, there really wasn't. There was just me. But now I'm in a position where we have a whole lot more going on. So even if there's things I can't do, I'm able to bring in folks who can, and bring in some more programs and resources for our teachers. And that being said, if there is something that I want to share, I can send it out, to a whole lot of teachers really quickly from the position that I'm in.
A couple things come to mind. I know a lot of listeners to Geoinspirations are very passionate about geotechnologies, science, geography, and they want to be able to be more effective in spreading the word, raising awareness, doing educator professional development, et cetera. And one of the reasons why I wanted them to hear your story is so that for them to take heart that there is a way to build consensus. Now, the typical listener of this is not in the position that you're in, but knowing that there are different pathways into this and also ways that you can get some support. If you're passionate about something and you work tirelessly at it for years like you've done, Erika, that it can happen. And so it's very encouraging. I was personally very, kind of torn when you got your position at the state, because I thought, oh, those middle school students here, they've got a Woods Hole scientist as a teacher. What a great thrill. But then on the other hand, I was thinking, yeah, but Erika's going to be able to influence all kinds of different students and teachers through this new position. So it was ultimately good. And since you and I are both in education, right, we never want to discourage people from following their dreams. And I just think that this pathway of yours is fascinating. And I did not know about the art history part of your background at that goal. Now, what do you think about this, knowing that you can't really, and you don't really want to completely crush and bury your early, interests? What do you think about some of the new, customized vector tiles and things like that you can actually bring in some, story maps? You can bring some creativity into GIS. Isn't that kind of a neat thing for you to have stuck around in GIS for a while now? Some of that stuff is maybe you're able to do, whereas you couldn't do that 25 years ago?
Oh my goodness, it's amazing now. And the artist in me absolutely loves this. And we have this constant sort of conversation, I think everybody does, about STEM and STEAM and STREAM and all those different acronyms. And there's so many acronyms. I feel like all the acronyms are losing their meaning. I give kind of a STEM STEAM presentation often, and in that presentation I tell a story about that very first job, specific project I did when I got my job at the USGS, because that was basically my first big GIS project. But as I stepped through that project, I did all of the aspects really of STEAM. It's a great way of showing how when we do STEM or when we do STEAM, we may not use every single letter at every single moment of a process, but the reality is we use them all, throughout a project. And that project in particular is a great one to present to educators, because we did all this mapping and we had all this data, but literally then we had this equation that we put all of these index variables through to get another index variable. So there was actual math that I can show. And look, we did math. The computer didn't really, we did math. And, it's a great story. And then at the end, of that project, we had to create a publication that needed to tell a story and, be convincing. And, there was so much design in that. I mean, now telling the same story in an era of story maps and, all the ways that you can display data that is so much more attractive than it was, in 1999. Oh my goodness, 1999. We're in a different era, I think, of just capabilities. It's amazing. But sort of the story is the same. So I tell that story a lot, actually.
And isn't it interesting that you, I, others were that were involved with GIS and education were really doing STEM before STEM was even an acronym. But then when the whole STEM wave, if you will, came along, we were saying, hey, GIS, geospatial technology, spatial thinking, critical thinking, that has always been cross-disciplinary, right? We never have focused on just one. We may have come from different backgrounds, and indeed, as you know, in the literature, you can point to early adopters of GIS in education in the primary, secondary arena, and then also at the university level. And most of them actually were from science. It wasn't until a bit later that the geography teachers especially came around to using it for a variety of valid reasons. But those early adopters were really in biology, earth science teachers, and others were maybe a bit more used to using computers a little bit, and they were clunky back then. It wasn't an easy thing, maybe a bit more used to experimenting, things like that. And another thing that comes to mind, Erika, as you were talking with your seafloor mapping background, you must be loving things like the ecological marine units and the other layers that are just now at our fingertips. Oh my goodness.
It's amazing what you can see, and even things that are so simple. Like I just remember, I don't remember when this was, however many years ago, but when the ocean's base map came out,
Mm-hmm.
and there was just so much more easily accessible detail. And I was in the classroom when that happened, and I remember, having, being up in front of a class and teaching with GIS, talking about that, about just data and resolution. And I remember just flipping over to the ocean's base map, and I remember all these kids just being like, whoa.
It's not just an expansive blue.
Right. And, I think that, the detail, the level of detail that is available really is amazing. And, with so many tools like the Living Atlas and things like that, where everything is just right there for you, it's a totally different time of learning to teach with GIS. I mean, when we got that statewide license 10 years ago, it was a completely different story. And so many things that have happened since then, have been so exciting. And, I felt like my whole push as I was working with GIS here was just discovering barriers. What were the barriers? What was keeping teachers from actually using GIS in their teaching, and then figuring out how to break down those barriers. And that's been my whole goal. But it's really exciting now because the barriers are just getting lesser and lesser and lesser as the technology and the capabilities increase.
Indeed. There's still a few tech barriers, but like you say, many of them, not all of them, but many of them have been reduced. The challenges now seem to be still, how do I integrate in my curriculum, time, show me the value of this, awareness, and other things. But like you say, it is amazing how things have rapidly evolved. Now by the time this interview gets published, it'll be 2020. And it'll be, speaking of 10 years ago, I distinctly remember a institute I taught in 2010, so 10 years ago. It was the first multi-day institute where I decided, Joseph, you should just focus on web-based tools. You're just going to conduct the whole institute with just web-based mapping tools. And I thought, this is going to be really challenging, but I can do it. And that was the first time I'd ever done the whole thing with, at the time it was nationalatlas.gov. It was early stages of ArcGIS Online. It was census mapping tools and, a variety of things. But the whole idea of doing this with completely, online was it was scary, but it was pretty revolutionary. It was only 10 years ago. It seems like a lifetime ago. But yes, just for the benefit of the listeners, one of the layers that I was referring to earlier was that ecological marine units where you've got 10 kilometers, isn't it, Erika? 10-kilometer resolution, and you've got a column of different water, dissolved oxygen, pH, temperature, et cetera, all the way down to the floor, these columns. So yeah, that's just one of the many examples, like you said, in the Living Atlas and in other resources. Here's something that you touched on a bit ago with the classes and the journey that you were on. But Erika, I'm wondering, was there a person that stands out in your journey forward that inspired you in some way?
There have been so many people that have been, so important all along the way. And I think that, as I've gone into different, areas, different people have become, more and more important and have had sort of a greater influence. But it's interesting, as I think about that question, I had this thought earlier today. I was completely thinking about something else, but I was thinking about my dad was a teacher. And obviously when I went into geology, I was not thinking that I was going to be a teacher, but he really was an incredible teacher. And he taught photography at a community college. Yeah, he was really cool, and seriously cool. And he loved his students well. They loved him. I mean, he was just the kind of educator that I think we all want to be. And what's interesting is because I did not have that, desire at the time to really be a teacher, I wasn't sort of looking to him, as a model. But then when I did look at becoming a teacher, unfortunately he had passed away before that ever happened. But, I think that, he just has such a strong work ethic. He always said, if you're going to do something, you have to do it the very best that you can do it. Like whatever you do, you just have to do it the very best that you're going to do it. And, couple that with, just a personality that is just all about, the people in the room. And I think that, in whatever job I've been in, especially since entering education, it's about the people in the room. It's about the kids in the room that, you are blessed to spend that next hour with. It's about the educators, that are in the room that you get to share your favorite technology with. It's about the colleagues in the room that you get to figure out, the next problem with. And I just think that, that idea of, just being the teacher in whatever role you're in, and being about the people in the room, that's just something that's always, I think, was instilled in me and has always been really important to me.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. Isn't it interesting that, as time goes on and we think about projects and people that we've worked with, it's the people that kind of bubble up more than the projects. Like if you asked me, hey, Joseph, what were you doing, 10 years ago when the decade was changing? Well, maybe I was preparing for this 3-day web GIS Institute, web mapping institute. But in terms of what I was doing that particular month, I'm not really sure what I was doing. I mean, I was in the field, doing this stuff. But the people, and that's what's so great about, working in science, geography, geospatial, education. The people are just so wonderful, aren't they, Erika? You never encounter people that are, I'm not going to share my wisdom, my knowledge, my data, my methods with you. On the contrary, it's always, how can I help you be successful? That's what I love about this community. So I agree with you. We're kind of standing on the shoulders of giants.
I think we really are. And I have to say, and, I'm not trying to, to say anything, but I feel like this community in particular, this geospatial community, is one of the most, I don't know, it's kind. It is a kind community, but it is a community of people who really want to share. And I think when that community, this really caring community, perhaps it's because we're always looking at the earth. We're always, investigating this world we live in, we're very focused on that. But I think that when that sort of wonderful geospatial mindset gets attached to, that teacher heart, I think that, really great things happen. And I think that the geospatial education community has been incredibly supportive and influential in my time, certainly since I entered the classroom, because I entered the classroom in 2008. We got the statewide license in 2009, and I was immediately plugged into the community. I mean, I guess I met you. That's when I met you, and I think that immediately getting plugged into that community really, provided tremendous support for me. And, if that hadn't happened, if I hadn't gotten plugged into this community and been, tasked with sharing GIS with, our educational community here, who knows what my path would have been. So this community is just such an incredibly supportive community. And I've never felt like I was, the only one. I may have sometimes felt like the lone wolf in West Virginia, but I never felt alone.
Mm-hmm.
Because this geospatial education community is such a strong, supportive community.
I completely agree. Ever since I discovered the community as well, I've never wanted to be in any other community. The nice thing is that we do get to work with people in a diversity of backgrounds these days. There are people coming into GIS, geospatial technology from, sociology, from a business, right? From health. And it's great to have a growing pool of people with different backgrounds. And so it's nice to be able to work with those folks. But like you say, I think it touches on, we definitely care about the planet. There is this earth ethic that the community has that, hey, we don't have any time to waste. We really need to, this is more than just, a nice career to have and good people. It is imperative that we empower people to think critically and spatially about local to global issues. Yeah, absolutely. Right. Another thing you touched on, I can personally relate to. My mom was a teacher, lifelong teacher. And so I would see her grading papers every night, and interacting with the students through, looking at their papers and things like that. And then occasionally I get to observe her in the classroom, and that made a big impression on me. But kind of like you, I actually education was really not in my plan. I knew I wanted to be a geographer. I knew I loved making maps and working with data. But it again, it's kind of, this is kind of, in a way, very, very similar to you at the USGS. So when I was at the USGS, I was on this path of, okay, I was at NOAA and Census Bureau before then, but always as a geographer, working with data and producing data sets and things like that. And sort of about halfway through my USGS tenure, I started visiting schools. I started doing a lot more trainings. I'm like, I really love this education aspect. So it's really interesting that you and I, we didn't intersect at the USGS, but we kind of were both pulled into education while we were there. And when you look at the history of that agency, as you well know, but just for the benefit of the listeners, John Wesley Powell, the second director of the USGS, but one of the early pioneers, of course, was a public school teacher for 9 years before he, went down the Colorado River and did all this exploration. So there's always been a good education and research dual component with that agency and with many other agencies as well that we could talk about, the founding of NOAA, et cetera, the Forest Service and other good agencies. So anyway, thanks for sharing all of that. Another thing I wanted to ask you is the following. You touched on it a little bit with your sort of forward thinking, but do you have any advice for folks that are new to this area, mapping, science, education, GIS, and or maybe threaded in there? Where do you think we need to go with this? New decade. What do we need to be working on and focusing on?
If I focus just on on the mapping aspect, folks that are new to that, it's really interesting. I just had a former student reach out and tell me that they're in GIS and they were looking for some advice. And thankfully I have a community of GIS people. I think that my advice is sort of always find your people. Here in West Virginia, we've got a really strong association of geospatial professionals that meet every year and that talk and that share resources and share ideas. And again, it's a strong community. And I think that within, those that are entering, mapping in GIS, I feel like you've got to find your community. And, I think that the same thing, if somebody's going into the sciences, I think it's the same thing. You find your passion and you find the thing that you're really interested in, and you need to not be afraid to follow that. I mean, I remember when when I finally made that decision to go from being an art major to being a science major, that was a really big decision. I always say that I think my father cried because I left, the arts, but I think my mom cheered because she thought I might actually make some money. And, I think, but I think that, that was a scary decision. But at the same time, I think we need to not be afraid to make scary decisions. And, if someone were entering, the field of education right now, I think that number one, I would give them a huge hug. And, then after that, I would say, you've got to find your community, and you've got to find, those amazing educators that are in all these schools that we have that just are there for, all the reasons that we want educators to be there. They're there because they just love children, and they want to make a difference in their lives, and they want to prepare them for whatever that future might be. I think that we're at this really amazing time in education where things are changing so quickly, and so much information is just so accessible that what we do with students is changing. I mean, they have to be taught how to think and evaluate information and distill all this information that's coming at them. And I think that, it's kind of a new day. It's kind of like the purpose hasn't changed, but, we're always going to be preparing kids, so that they can be successful in their futures. But at the same time, I think some of the ways that we need to do that has to shift. We really have to teach them how to think and how to evaluate, all that's coming at them. I think that GIS is a tremendous tool for doing that. And I think that that's something that I really push a lot, is that I'm teaching it as this is an amazing tool to get students into a position where they can make decisions, where they can evaluate, data, where they can look at problems and solve problems. And I think that, it's not something that we can let go. It's really a tool we need to incorporate.
Yeah, totally agree with you, Erika. The idea of using GIS just to teach GIS skills, while some detractors over the years have said you're just teaching, people how to push buttons. That's never been the idea of anybody that I know that's ever been involved with geospatial education. We are always about teaching critical thinking skills, working with data skills, presenting skills, right? Communicating your results of your research. And then also, though, while we're teaching the buffering or the geocoding or whatever that's just a tool to enable a greater goal. The greater goal is you understand more about natural hazards or population change or watersheds or energy or, you know what I mean? Ecoregions, you name it, right? It's always about the content. And sure, you're using a tool, but it's never, even if you're in a GIS course, right, which I know you and I have taught over the years as well, even if you're in a GIS course where your goal is really to learn, to help people learn GIS, you're still, every one of those lessons is embedded in some real place, some real issue. So you're still teaching content, even in a GIS course, which I think is wonderful. And that's one of the reasons why, I've never gotten bored or tired of it over all these years.
It's not something that's ever boring. I think that, one of the things that's been so exciting to me just in the last year or so has been to be able to share GIS with people here at the department that are actually making a lot of really important decisions. And, I think that whenever you can show someone what you can really do with a GIS, it's just so fun because you can see them get it. I mean, just like you see a kid have their light bulb moment, when you can show even an adult, the power of a GIS, they have those light bulb moments. And I think that, that's what needs to happen. We need to see the power of it, all over, and it will grow in schools. And that's what I'm trying to do.
We have such respect for you in the community, Erika, all of your accomplishments. And the journey is really a fascinating one. And one of the things I'd like to sort of pull out of that is just for the benefit of, you folks that are listening to this, that you're like, hey, I love science, I love art, I love education. Can I have some sort of career where I'm touching on all of those things? Well, look at Erika's pathway. You don't have to follow exactly Erika's pathway, but I think one of the things that, she's showing is that, don't be afraid to in some ways switch gears at certain points in your career, right? I think that you've well exemplified that. Don't be afraid to take risks. Stretch, go out, on something that, okay, I didn't really have this plan, but I'm feeling pulled into this direction, and don't be afraid to go there. And just on a personal note too, Erika, when I left the USGS. And I was basically there from like the Cretaceous to the Holocene, so a hugely long period of time. And I really love that agency, and I still do. It's got such a rich history, a deep history, and so on. And I love NOAA, and I love Census Bureau. But it was like, can I keep growing here, or do I join the ESRI education industry team? And so, it was a scary thing, even though there were many good things, the pull factors, the push factors. It was still scary, but I'm glad I did it. And I'm glad for all of those, the changes that I've had, even though going through them, sometimes I was a little bit nervous about those changes, and, new people, new environment, and all that kind of stuff. But like you say, you feel really supported by the community in different positions within that community. So I think that's another good, sort of reassurance for the listeners that, yeah, okay, but rest assured you're going to be with good people. If you're in this broad field of, looking at the earth, you're not going to be with people that are really abrasive, right? That that they won't share data, that they won't share helping you out. Oh my gosh, yes, absolutely. All right, Erika, we're kind of, I'm being sensitive to your time here and coming up to the sort of the end of our time together, but do you have a favorite, oh gosh, how do I put this? A favorite map, a favorite book, a favorite resource that you wanted to share with people?
Oh my goodness. I don't, I'm trying to think of a favorite map. There are so many maps that I have always just loved to be able to sit and look at. But I'm going to share an old USGS map just because I have a funny story now that goes with it. There's a USGS map that's called a Tapestry of Time.
Oh my gosh, I love that map. Yes.
And that map was everywhere. That map was in my undergrad. That map was in my graduate school work. When I worked at the USGS, that map was there. I took a copy to my classroom. It hung in my classroom until it basically got destroyed. But it was so funny because I went to a bookstore here in Charleston, West Virginia, not long ago, and I had never been there before, and they have a coffee shop in there, and I was meeting someone for a meeting there, and I went in, I got my coffee, and I turned around, and there was a framed copy of that map. And I was just so excited because I was like, look at that. Even in this position, I get to go sit under that map. And, so it's a wonderful map. It's probably not the most exciting map in the world, but it's just a map that has, really always kind of been present.
I believe that the base map for that was the Thielen and Pike 1992 first map that was ever made from the NED data, the National Elevation Data Set, which was, of course, compiled from thousands of individual DEMs, digital elevation models. And so, yeah, I too love that map because you can see the Coteau de Praire, the Sutter Buttes in California, the Llano Estacado. I mean, yeah, you and I could go on for quite a while about these wonderful resources, but isn't it amazing that, from having a seamless digital elevation map was such a breakthrough, and yet we've only just begun, right? I feel like we're just getting rolling with all the exciting developments, and it gives us great hope for the future, right, Erika? I mean, knowing that there are, like you touched on, good people, good tools, good data, we can solve these complex, vexing problems of our 21st century world. We can.
We can, and I think that's one of the things that I have a lot of hope about is that we can solve these problems, and it is getting easier just because we can share, we can look at data in so many different ways. There's never just one way to do something, and I think that the things are really opening up. There's a lot that we can do now, and I'm excited to see what happens.
Oh, it is going to be an exciting decade for sure, and it's good to have colleagues like you that are changing the world for the better, Erika. So thanks for being with us here on the Geoinspirations column. Seriously, it was such a great honor. I know how busy you are, and so appreciate the time that you've spent with us, and wish you all continued success for the future.
Well, thank you, Joseph, and thank you for all of your support and inspiration over the years.
Oh, it's a huge honor.